The Cloak and the Dagger, Part 2. The sun shone outside, of that Jess was certain. He was just unsure of where he was. All sense of time had eluded him. He recalled sleeping a lot. He even recalled waking up once in a while in a foggy haze. But he wasn't sure if a night or a fortnight had passed. Either was possible. He rubbed his eyes and let out a deep breath. Running his hands down his tired face, he felt whiskers on his chin. This forced him awake far too quickly. He didn't need to shave before he fell asleep, and the realization that there was hair on his face frightened him. He scrabbled to get up from the floor and found his legs and arms didn't cooperate, but instead flopped about almost uselessly. He promptly fell back down. They didn't seem to be the right length. He struggled to keep his balance as he got up once again. There was something very wrong. He wasn't in his own body anymore. Suddenly his head began to pound painfully and his vision blurred. He fell to the floor and the world went black again.
"And she has not returned, so it cannot be awake. You know she is waiting for it to wake up. If only Gomet had been able to poison it before it woke up, this would never have happened. Do you think we should kill it?"
Jess thought he recognized the voice of the creature Gomet from the cave. He wondered who it could be talking to.
"I'm telling you,"
Jess recognized the soft, pleasant voice of Spleef.
"she will not return for at least a week. It is not supposed to be awake yet, but I know I saw it try to get up. You must believe me, you must." "Gomet believes you, but we should still try to kill it."
Jess groaned as he tried to quietly roll over.
You see, it wakes. This is what it did in my cave. We must kill it, we must. Gomet can hurry to his cave and be back with—"
Spleef cut him off.
"There will be no talk of poison. It cannot be allowed to live. Look at it. It rises to its feet. You know what she wants it for. We must destroy it."
Jess cleared his throat. This did nothing to help the pounding in his head. He wanted to speak to try and understand what the two creatures were talking about, but only a gasp came out, and he needed to cough again.
"I must get water," Spleef told Gomet. "No water for it. She told you not to touch it. If she sees you are helping it, Gomet fears she will punish you. I must not allow it to expire. That was another one of my instructions. No, you cannot. Gomet will stop you from helping it. Gomet doesn't want the master to see you helping it. Better it dies than Spleef. Move!"
Jess had a hard time getting his eyes to focus. He could make out the two small shapes scuffling, but little else. His mind didn't want to seem to focus on anything, even coherent thought. The sun from outside hurt his eyes, and he found he had to keep them mostly closed. This didn't matter much, as he could only make out vague shapes. When he was finally able to struggle to his feet, he moved toward what looked mostly like a chair and cast his body into it. He felt for the edges of the robe, and upon his touching his chest, discovered that he now had hair there as well. This wasn't as big of a shock as the whiskers on his face, but still startled him. The chair was comfortable, and he was able to ignore the continuing argument going on behind him. The two creatures had changed the topic of his demise to their own, but Jess just wanted his head to clear. He gently rubbed his temples and took several deep breaths. His relaxation was disturbed by the front door opening and slamming closed. He sat up straight, then wished he hadn't, and allowed himself to slump back into the chair. He gripped his head with both hands. If he had anything in his stomach, he might have expelled it, but he could tell it was empty. Spleef arrived at his side with a glass of water.
"Please, drink this,"
she said, pushing the glass into his hands. The water was cold and more refreshing than Jess could ever recall a glass of water being. He drank deeply between two deep breaths, and felt his head clear slightly. Once it was drained, Spleef took the glass and refilled it. Again, Jess drained the glass. To his surprise, his eyes suddenly came back into focus. Jess paused to cough violently, which made him feel surprisingly better. "Thank you."
"Can I bring you food?"
Spleef asked. It felt like an age since Jess had tasted real food. The last hot meal he had eaten was the maggot mushroom mash Gomet had fed him. He began to think of that meal and decided he'd wait for a while before trying to eat. "That's fine. I think I'll wait a bit."
"As you please. Can I bring you anything? Are you comfortable? Should I draw the blinds? The light may be too bright for you."
Jess realized he was squinting. He thought it would be a good idea to close the blinds, but his body felt good. The warmth was pleasant, and he decided against allowing Spleef to close the blinds. I'm fine, he said. He looked at Spleef curiously. She, for Jess assumed it was a female, more by its voice than any obvious physical appearance, looked very much like Gomet. Her face was more smooth and friendly, but she was dirty and pointy-eared just like Gomet. He wondered, as she stood there nervously twisting her feet on the ground and wiggling her hands, if he could ask her questions. If I ask you something, will you answer me honestly? Spleef cast her gaze about nervously, as if this question conflicted her. She shuddered for a moment and softly said, "Yes." A warm, welcoming smile spread across Jess's face. "You have nothing to fear from me," he said to reassure her. "I mean you no harm."
"I understand,"
she said, obviously very confused. Jess felt like he had to explain himself. "I only want you to answer my questions. I do not want to hurt you." Spleef looked down and shook her head as if the words he'd spoken didn't make any sense to her. He reached down, put his hand under her chin, and raised her head so his eyes met with hers. "You can trust me," he said. The look of confusion on her face melted away to a look of pure joy. Her pointed ears perked up, and for what Jess thought could be for the first time in her miserable existence, she smiled. The smile flickered on and off her face, as if it didn't belong there, before she spoke again.
"You mean real trust?"
"Of course. I mean you no harm. If you help me, then perhaps I can help you." Spleef looked at the ground.
"How can one such as you help a being such as I?"
"All beings deserve help. You have brought me water. I needed your help, for I could not have done that on my own. Now I require answers to questions. You can help me again by answering those questions."
"I do many such things for my master. That is what I do. I do not do such things for the expectation for anything in return. Should I ask for something for her, I am sure to be punished. Yet you say if I do the same things for you, you will help me?"
"Yes." Jess waited for Spleef to absorb the power of such a simple word. The nervous twisting of her foot stopped. She was no longer wringing her hands. Her back straightened and she stood to her full height, just half the height of Jess. The simple offer to help this creature not only empowered it, it also empowered Jess. He felt good, better than he had ever felt in his life. Such a simple thing that Jess had always taken for granted growing up. Do something for a person, and they'll do something for you. He had done his chores, and his father made sure to supply a warm bed and food each day. It was such a simple realization Jess had come to, but profound nonetheless. Though he felt like he was being ordered around and hated it, it was growing up that he hated, not his father. He suddenly wished he had never left home.
"What is it you wish to ask of Spleef?"
Jess was pulled back to the conversation he'd started. Answers were what he wanted, but where to start? He knew he wanted to find out where he was and how long he'd been asleep, but that suddenly seemed secondary to helping this creature. He tried to formulate questions in his mind. "What are you?" he asked at last. Spleef was taken aback by this question.
"I am a goblin, of course. Have you never seen a goblin?"
"No. I grew up on a farm far from here. I've never been away from home. The woods at the edge of our fields was the farthest I'd ever gone before. In fact, I've never been away from home for more than a night or two hunting in the woods. Do goblins live all over?"
"Oh, yes. There are many goblins all over the world. Most live in caves, much too small for people to get into, but my master has found a way not only to find my people, but to capture us."
"Why does she capture you? What is it she wants from your people?" Jess recalled the goblins working in the fields outside the house, picking rocks. What does she do with all those rocks she gathers? Spleef suddenly looked nervous.
"Such questions have never been asked of me. I fear I may not answer them correctly. I have not had to go into the fields as Gomet has. He tells me little, but I will answer as best I can. She captures us to do her work, that is obvious. Those in the fields collect stones, which are many in this area. My master collects the power from those stones and casts them back into the fields so that they may gather more power for her. I think that is the best way to explain it."
Jess was confused. "What is she?"
Spleef gasped. "Surely you must know. She is a powerful sorceress, a sorceress most cruel."
"She has enslaved you?" Jess spurted as the realization hit him.
"Yes,"
Spleef said and started crying. "Does she mean to make me a slave?" Jess asked, sitting up straight and scooting to the edge of his seat.
"Oh no, don't make me answer that. Please do not make me answer."
Jess felt bad for the creature, but now he had to know the answer. "I must know. Am I in danger?"
More than you possibly know.
Jess stood up. I've got to get out of here.
No!
Spleef almost yelled. What? You've just told me I have a fate worse than slavery. What could be worse than that?
It's not that. It's that if you leave, my master will know I have had something to do with it. I will be punished most severely. She is a cruel, wicked woman. Please do not leave. You cannot.
But I must. Spleef crumbled to the floor and began crying terribly. Jess felt bad for the little goblin. He realized he was only thinking of himself. That was what got him into this situation in the first place. It was time he started thinking of someone else. He reached down and helped Spleef up off the floor. He put her in the chair he'd been sitting in, and went to the small hand pump where she'd gotten the water. If it had made him feel good, perhaps it would make her feel better. The door slammed open. The sorceress stood framed in the doorway with a scowl on her face. "What are you doing in my chair, creature?" she spat at Spleef. With a wave of her hand, Spleef was cast from the chair and onto the floor. She cried out in pain. Jess wanted to rush to her aid, but froze at the sight of the sorceress. The woman's eyes narrowed before she entered the house. Her first glance was to the cauldron where Jess was supposed to be lying. Her eyes widened. "Where has the boy gone?" she demanded, pointing a finger at the helpless goblin. "Answer me, or feel my wrath." Spleef shivered on the floor, but made no other movements. Jess feared the woman was going to kill the poor creature. "I'm here," he said as strongly as he could. "Awake? How is that?" she asked rhetorically. "It is not time yet. Did you help him?" Her question and finger pointed at Spleef.
"No, master, I did not help the boy. He just woke up a short time ago. I know not what to do."
The sorceress continued to ignore Jess and continued to question Spleef. "What have you done to him? Tell me everything. I will know if you're lying." Spleef rolled into a sitting position and started mumbling. It angered Jess to see the goblin treated in such a way. "She owes you no explanation," he said, drawing himself up to his full height. He felt quite tall and wondered if he looked it. The sorceress lowered her hand and brought her glare to bear upon Jess. She narrowed her eyes and looked him up and down. "How dare you address me in such a manner? I brought you into my home. I tended to you when you were near death. You repaid me with rudeness when I questioned one of my servants. Who do you think you are?" "I think I'm entitled to some answers." Jess took an uneasy step toward the sorceress, but tried not to allow his emotions to show. He was scared of the woman. She was obviously powerful, and he had no desire to tangle with her, but he couldn't stand by and watch her abuse a defenseless creature. "Brave words, little boy." "I don't think I'm a boy any longer," Jess retorted, tugging at the whiskers on his chin. "Not a boy, yet still not a man." "I think you need to explain what you did to me." Jess took another step toward the woman. "I think you need to stop coming toward me, or I'll be forced to hurt you. My plans do not include expending my power to put you in your place. You will sit in that chair and let me question my servant." Jess narrowed his eyes and cocked his head to the side, as if he were accepting her challenge. He tried, as quickly as his thoughts would allow, to come to grips with the situation, but his thoughts were still muddled, and thinking was far too slow for him to quip with the sorceress. She was mentally far superior to Jess, and he knew he would never win a battle of wits. He wondered if he would be able to take her physically. He wondered if he should chance it. "Sit, boy." Jess rushed her. He caught her by surprise. That was obvious by the scream she let out. She had apparently never been attacked before, or being surrounded by subdued slaves had caused her to let her natural defenses down. Not being used to his new body, Jess's strength carried the woman outside, and he tackled her to the ground. He hadn't thought about what he would do next, and fought to grab her hands. The sorceress was more deft at grappling than Jess expected, and managed to seize Jess by the throat. Reflexively, he grabbed her hand as her grip tightened. Without using her hands, she righted herself and came to stand with Jess's throat still in her grip. Her displeasure at having been thrown to the ground showed, and Jess felt his stomach turn.
Master, what has happened? You are back early," Gomet said,
running out of the field. "This is none of your concern. Get back to work." The sorceress pointed her finger at Gomet, and he was sent flying backwards into the field. He skidded to a stop and didn't move.
"Gomet!"
Spleef explained as she rushed out of the house. "Get back inside!" The sorceress yelled at Spleef and pointed her finger at the goblin. Spleef was sent sprawling back into the house and knocked against the far wall. She also lay motionless. Jess struggled to free himself. Twice he was able to kick the sorceress, but it felt like his bare toes had kicked stone instead of flesh. She tossed him back inside the house as well, and he landed hard next to the cauldron. His head bounced on the floor twice, and the room spun into darkness. Jess rolled his head from side to side. A headache pounded, and he tried to lie still. He opened his eyes and could see the sorceress collecting bottles of stones from the endless shelves and dump their contents into the cauldron. Rolling his head to the other side, he could see Spleef was still motionless on the floor. He felt like it was his fault she had been hurt, and wanted to do something to make things right. She had done for him, and he had done nothing for her. Looking under the chair he had been sitting in just a little while ago, he saw, folded up neatly, his father's thick cloak, and placed neatly upon it the dagger. Quickly he tried to formulate a plan. He knew he had surprised the sorceress once. He wondered if it would work twice. The sorceress walked slowly along the shelf and cursed quietly to herself. If only Spleef would wake up, this wretched task could be done so much quicker. Where is it? Where is it? Jess quietly rolled to the chair, taking care to make no noise and keep his eyes on the sorceress. When he'd made it to the chair, he slid the cloak out from under the chair and took the dagger from it. The blade made little noise as it came free from the scabbard. He looked at the badly worn blade and mentally cursed himself for not taking better care of his father's blade. The cloak was in better shape. It was dry now, and nearly as heavy as it had been when he was wearing it in the rainy woods. Grabbing one corner of the cloak, he stood and allowed it to unfold. He dragged it across the floor, and, with his bare feet not making a sound on the stone floor, snuck up behind the still mumbling sorceress. He took a deep breath and held it as he hefted the cloak into the air over her head. As expected, she let out a yowl and spun around, hands out in front of her where Jess should have been. He had ducked and rolled so as to be behind her as she turned around. He looked at the blade in his hand and plunged it into the flailing form under the cloak. The form stopped moving. Jess removed the dagger and saw the blood drip from its blade. He almost dropped the blade when he realized she was turning around. Head still covered by the cloak, Jess re-gripped the handle of the dagger and again plunged it deep into the cloak. Her hands came down where the blade had been, but Jess had already removed it. He stepped to her side and plunged the dagger into her again, and again, and again. He was unsure of how many times the blade went in, but he kept stabbing even after she had fallen. He wanted to take no chances of her ever getting up again. He didn't want to see the hands of this woman bring harm to any of the goblins anymore. When he felt the task was done, he dropped the dagger to the floor where it rattled several times before it became as still as the sorceress. Jess put his bloody hands to his face and sobbed over what he'd done. He wept over the killing. He wept for Spleef, who had suffered so much. He wept for Gomet. He wept for himself. He was confused, scared, and more alone now than he was when he was lost in the woods. He didn't know how far he was from his family, or even how much time had passed since he'd left home. All he wanted to do was find himself back home, doing his chores, away from this reality that had been thrust upon him. His sobbing was brought to a halt by a soft hand upon his shoulder. It was Spleef. The expression on her face was one of horror and shock. Jess wiped his tears from his eyes and looked around the room. Gomet was standing in the doorway with much the same expression.
"What have you done? What has happened to the master? Why is she so still?"
Gomet took a small step into the house, then withdrew his foot and stood, mouth agape, looking inside. He then turned and ran back into the fields, yelling as loud as he could. Jess couldn't make out what he was yelling.
"Is she?"
Spleef let the question trail off. "She is." Jess felt Spleef's hand shake on his shoulder. He wasn't sure if he was laughing or crying, but he thought it might be a little of both. "Everything will be all right," he said, trying to reassure her. "You're not a slave anymore. You're free." Spleef took in a sharp breath as if the words were too much for her to comprehend. She began to fidget and look about worriedly, her lips moving, but no sound came out. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine," he said again.
"How can it be? The master, she is dead. The master is dead. Do you not understand? You have struck her down. You said you would help. How could you have done such a thing?"
Spleef backed away from Jess and held her hands before her face and began to cry uncontrollably. Jess looked at her and couldn't understand what she was crying about. He'd killed the sorceress. He'd taken away the cause of the goblin's pain. That was when Gomet reappeared in the doorway with dozens of other goblins in tow. Each dirty face peeked in through the doorway and looked to where the sorceress's still body lay. There was rumbling from the goblins, but nothing Jess could understand.
Did you do this? Did you kill the master? Tell Gummet that you did not kill the master. Please tell us that the master is not dead.
She is dead, Jess said with a frown. He hung his head in shame, and then looked back up at the horrified faces of the goblins. I killed her. Your master is dead.
No!
Several goblins cried. Jess was confused over this reaction. Gummet fell to the ground and pounded it with his fists as if he were a child throwing a temper tantrum. Over the cries and wails, Jess could still hear Spleef's soft sobs. He turned and walked over to her. I had thought killing the sorceress, the master, would be a good thing. What have I done wrong? Have I not taken away your pain?
You promised you would help Spleef if I helped you. How could you have done such a thing?
I killed the master.
Only one more evil than the master could kill the master, for all know that the one who kills the master becomes the master. How could you deceive me so? Why do you wish to hurt me when you said I could trust you?
Jess didn't grasp what Spleef had said. I killed her for you. How can that be wrong? Doesn't this help you?
How can it help for one master to be dead, only to have a master more evil than the first?
More evil? Do you mean me?
You killed the master. You now take her place. Oh, how could I have been such a fool to trust a human? They only lie and trick the goblins into slavery. How could I have been such a fool? How?
Spleef curled up into a ball and cried uncontrollably. It took Jess a few moments to gather his thoughts and figure out what Spleef was saying. The noise of the goblins was overwhelming and he had difficulty thinking. He stood up and shouted, "Quiet!" The house was filled with silence as all the goblins quieted down. They all looked at Jess with wide eyes and blank expressions. Then it hit him. Spleef had said he was now the master. The goblins think I killed the sorceress to become the master. They think I will be worse than she was. They are afraid I will rule as the sorceress ruled them. Everyone, come inside, Jess said. The goblins all shuffled inside, fear upon their faces. Jess looked them over, and a smile spread its way across his face. This only made the goblins look more frightened. I mean you no harm. I mean none of you any harm, Jess said.
Then why did you kill the master? The master is dead and you killed her. Why, if you wish us no harm, the master harms us, and you are now the master.
I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to be your master either.
You killed the master. You are evil. How can we trust one who kills the master? Only one who wants to be the master would kill the master.
Jess held his hands up to quiet the questions. I did not kill the master to become the master, Jess said. He rolled his eyes. He was talking like the goblins now. I killed the sorceress that had enslaved you. That's all I did. I did not do it to become your master. I did it to free you. There was an uproar for the goblins.
It lies! It killed the master! We are its slaves!
Quiet down, quiet down. Yes, I killed her. She wanted to trap me again. For how long? I don't know. I don't even know for how long I was her prisoner. I killed her to free myself as much to free you. Surely you must see that. Gommet took a step forward.
You said that word again. Free. What does it mean?
Free? It means... Jess started, and then tried to think of the best explanation. It means you don't have to do what I tell you to do. It means you can do what you want to do instead of what you're told to do.
Gommet doesn't understand. What do we do without a master?
Whatever you want. Go back to your caves and live the life you had before if you want. Stay here and live in this house by the lake. It means you don't have to take orders anymore. The goblins all turned to each other and whispers were passed back and forth. Spleef still eyed Jess with suspicion. Jess mouthed, "Free," to her and smiled. He then mouthed, "Trust me." Her look softened slightly. Gommet turned back around and looked sternly at Jess.
How do we know you're not trying to trick us?
Jess thought this over. He had to come up with an answer that would mollify them without causing more suspicion. Help me prepare to leave and go back to my own home. But only help me if you want to do it, not because I am ordering you to do so. When you see me leave, you will know that I mean you no harm and do not wish to be your master. Gommet looked thoughtful for a moment, then said softly,
Gommet will not help you.
And he turned and headed for the door. He kept casting nervous glances back at Jess. Jess bowed deeply and motioned to the door. Several other goblins followed in a hurry. Who will stay and help me prepare for a journey home? Remember, only stay if you wish. I will make you do nothing against your will." Spleef stepped forward.
"I will help."
"Thank you." Spleef blushed. Several other goblins came forward.
"We will help you also. We will help."
Jess took the time to thank each one in turn. The goblins made him new clothes, for his were now too small to fit. Food was packed in plenty, and water skins were filled. Several goblins took the sorceress's body outside and cast it into the lake. They didn't want to put it into the ground or cover it with stone, for fear she would be able to come back and hurt them again. It took much of the day, and Jess decided to stay the night before leaving. The following day he was amazed when hundreds of goblins came to see him leave. He felt he should say a few words. He wanted to make sure they knew that he meant what he said the day before. I leave you now. I thank you all for your help. I wish you the best of luck with your freedom. I will remember you, for you helped me. I hope that you will remember me, and one day we may cross paths again. Goodbye." Cheers rose up from the goblins as Jess waved and turned to enter the woods. He was sure they would be fine. He was certain that the goblins would not have to suffer the torment of the sorceress again. He walked into the woods and decided not to look back. He felt that if they did not see him looking back, they would feel better about his leaving. Jess had left home, a stubborn child. Though he didn't remember any of it, he had grown into a man. Spleef had told him that 5 years had passed while he slept. He hoped that his parents would remember him. He adjusted his pack, made from his father's cloak, and checked the dagger at his side, freshly sharpened by Gomet, who did come back to help. Smiling as he walked through the woods, he thought of home, and how good it would be to return.